Tom Parker. So nicknames I picked up along the way would have been Colonel Tom Parker, the Colonel. First of all, I was born in Southampton, England. After the war, we came to Canada, and we lived at my grandma's farm just outside of Transcona, just outside the city. And then when the farm was sold, we moved into Elmwood, which eventually becomes the key ingredient in terms of me finding lacrosse. I first got involved in lacrosse when I was 18. Up till then, I was track and field. I was involved in football, juvenile football, and I played junior soccer. So at a time when I thought, I don't want to continue with football, I still wanted to play the game that had some contact. And my little brother was already playing lacrosse, so I'd go to Kelvin and watch the games, and so I thought, I'm going to try it. So I got into it. So I was a late comer to lacrosse. Some of my friends were playing lacrosse in high school, and again, my brother was playing, and at 15 he was getting called up to play in some of the summer games with the senior teams because guys were on holidays. So that kind of led me there, and I played with the stick and ball because of other people, but I hadn't played it as a game. So it was an interesting experience to start when all the other kids were playing at 12 and 13. You were joining them. I could run. I was a good runner, and I played fullback in soccer, so I was defensively minded. So even though I was small, I played a lot of defense, and eventually became very good at hitting forwards as they were breaking out of our zone. And so I got a lot of assists, not many goals. Well, I think twice in my life I scored 3 goals in a game, but I wasn't a big goal scorer at all. I've had 2 families. So my first family, I had the kids playing some lacrosse at home, but we didn't have anything in the area, so they didn't. I coached them playing soccer, and that was their big sport, and running. So they're grown up now, and they all live in the Vancouver area. And the second family, and again, soccer was the main sport the kids played, and I coached them. So my family didn't come up with lacrosse. We had a field right behind us where soccer teams played, and that was their game of choice. My brother's name was Alan, and he was a pretty good goal scorer. He loves to tell the story about when he came up at 15 to play senior ball because of the summer holidays, and he was kind of terrified, and the game was about to start, and one of the guys who was in our Hall of Fame was just a huge gentleman, and by the name of Ralph Linden. And Ralph got down for the draw, and then he said, whoa, to the ref, and he looked at the bench. He said, just so we all know, the kid is with me. And Ralph played with, he never wore regular gloves. He wore a little kind of mitts and no pads. And if you hit him, you're thinking, oh, I really hurt this guy. Somebody new thinks, oh, I can hit her. It was worth your life. Both his sons played in high school, and they played minor lacrosse. And in high school, they played field lacrosse. And they were quite good. But the family ended up, one son went north to work up north, and the other one went to university, became a teacher. And at that point, there wasn't a place to get into field at that level. So I started off as a classroom teacher, started switching classes with somebody who'd teach my art, and I would do the phys ed, and eventually the University of Manitoba in 1964 had a phys ed degree. Up until then, you had to go down to North Dakota, Bemidji, and so I I took a leave from teaching and took a phys ed degree, and along the way I came back to St. Boniface, which was the southeast corner of Winnipeg, and had a real French Catholic influence to it. And as a phys ed supervisor, I started teaching my phys ed teachers about lacrosse, and so we were playing it in elementary and junior high and eventually high school. From there, I was, somewhere along the line there, I became president of the Manitoba Lacrosse Association, and dragged my brother into that, and we adapted the box game. So for community clubs, we got hockey people involved, and for summer activity, eye-hand coordination, and we took off hitting completely. So it was, you couldn't invade a person's personal space. So a kid who's just starting and picking up ball and feeling clumsy, you couldn't run him over, you couldn't hit his stick at first. So he had so many seconds to pass and run, and you get to center, you had to have the ball passed over center. You couldn't run it across. And you had 5 seconds with the ball, in which case the official would turn it over if you hadn't passed it. So the game turned out to be really good. We had, I remember a couple of ladies who I knew from phys ed, who I saw in an arena in the South End, and they said, you know, when my kid said he wanted to play lacrosse, I thought, no, this is not a game you want to play. But she said, I'm looking at this, and this is great. He's having more fun than he ever had in hockey. And so we went from about 6 minor teams to about 53, and most of the credit for that was due to my brother Alan, who was a phys ed teacher and had done some things within the school that we had started, and then he got involved in coordinating it. So we had a big boom in enrollment in box lacrosse. Inevitably, you run into somebody who says, well, we have to go to Calgary. Well, why do you have to go to Calgary? Well, because we did it in hockey. So that, I call it the hockey mentality. The hockey mentality took over, and so these groups started going to Calgary, and they wanted hitting because they were contact there. And yet, the Calgary coaches said, God, all your kids can pass and catch and throw and run. But things started to change again. And by then, I was a school trustee, and I'd retired as a high school principal, and I was a school trustee, and so I had to drop back. I dropped out of being involved in the Manitoba Lacrosse Association and went from there. But I continued my lacrosse things because I do clinics out of town. I'd go and I'd do a clinic in the southwest part of the province, Burden, and a few years ago I kind of came back to it again and did some clinics on reserves that are in western Manitoba. So I stayed a little involved with it, but the big thing was getting involved with the Hall of Fame. One of the fellows at the local high school, Churchill High School, had played some lacrosse, so he was a friend of mine. We did track camps together. So he started doing some things in Churchill, and then that gave us some young players there. So I was coaching the team, the South End Olympics. We ended up changing names. And we were there for a few years, and we had a lot of good players from Fort Rouge. Eventually we moved to St. Boniface, which was my home area, and we became the St. Boniface Clubs. And you were talking to Jeep Woolley, who was a salesperson for club beer. And so they sponsored us. They provided uniforms and covered our costs at the arena and so forth. So then we had a lot of things happening back in St. Boniface where I had started. I went to the University of Oregon after University of Manitoba. I came back for a few years, but I took a break and went to the University of Oregon. And as I'm walking around their student union building, I saw a sign for lacrosse. So I went over there, and they said, so what level of lacrosse are you from? And I said, I would say reasonably good. And he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Canada." He said, "Oh, you'll come out and try out for the traveling team." So that was my first taste of field lacrosse, and I loved it. We got two 12-passenger vans every weekend, and we would go to Portland or Seattle or across to Salt Lake City or down to San Francisco on the weekend. And we'd play a couple games and then drive back. And so I really liked field lacrosse because you had more room to move. And again, I said I had a soccer background, so I was used to having the space. So that was fun. And eventually we started doing some things locally. And I wasn't the initiator of it. It was a guy, one of my phys ed teachers, Al Stewart, knew somebody in Saskatoon they were trying field. So we put a group of guys together, went out there and played and did very well. And we thought, okay, why don't we try this game here? Our first experience was in BC. We went to the Nationals. It was a kind of frustrating experience and yet a good one. We played Ontario first, and we had some good ball players, but we had trouble getting the ball over center. And I think the score was about 32-3 or something like that. And so that was pretty frustrating. And then this would have been 83. And then we played BC, and we got beaten by them because they had some pretty, like half the national team, the whole national team was on the Ontario or the BC team.
Yes.
And, but it was quite different. They treated us like Westerners. And some people may not understand that, but so their attack guys were busy coaching our defenders the whole time. When this happens, this is what you should be doing. And when you think I'm going to get a pass, the goaltender should be yelling, "Ball clear" or something, and slap my stick if you think I'm getting it. And the same thing down the other end. The attack guys were learning, this is what you should be doing. You got to create these openings and picks and so forth. So,
spirit of the game.
Yeah, it was really good. We had a great time. So a couple years later, we held the Canadians here, and they were going to have Ontario and BC play,
Right.
and the rest of us play. So we said we kind of like to play against Ontario and BC. Some of the other teams were a little upset from other places, but the team from Huntsville was upset. But we played, and our game had improved a lot. Like we were losing to BC about 13-7 or something. So, we came a long way in 2 years, and we went down to the States and played in a couple of college games down there, and we had a college team come up here to play. So we got a little bit of experience. And then 85, 86, it was just senior B, and we rolled right through it. And we had some great ball players, and Keith McLennan was one of our top goal scorers, and he's in the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame. And another gentleman who was with us had come from Ontario, and he played big stick. Jerry Sobey is his name, and so our defense became very good because we just learned that part of the game. And so we won in 85, we won in 86, and in 87 we could have won again. Like nobody was going to come close to us in the Senior B. And the Six Nations wanted to play BC, Ontario, Six Nations, so they wanted 4 teams. So they said, would you guys come up and play? And so we talked about it, and we said, okay. Now keep in mind, we maybe got to play 2 games that whole summer, and we're going to a national championship against the very best. And we had 3 great games. We never won any of them, but they were probably the best games we ever played.
Wow.
And 2 of the games went down to the last 3 minutes before the other team scored to go ahead. And I remember Chris Hall with his Victoria team. Just being very nice to begin with, because Chris and I got to know each other. And at halftime, he's, "What are you guys doing? Come on." So, but we were never blown out. We were competitive in the games, and to me, that was probably the greatest experience ever, is getting to play at that level and coach at that level and see how far we had come in 5 years. As president of Manitoba Lacrosse, I got to go to the CLA meetings, and that was a different experience, and I quite enjoyed it. But it was a difficult organization to work with, because the strength was always Ontario, BC, and a fair amount of friction. So you're always trying to find compromises for them. But the whole organization was in trouble, and eventually, I guess we had a coup, and involved changing the way the CLA worked. So that's when I got to meet Bill Hutton, who, well, everybody from Ontario will know, and Peter Avender was the president of BC at the time. And so we managed to arrange a much better working relationship between the small provinces and the two giants. So I like that. And then Bill was instrumental in getting the foundation going. So I served on that for a little while, but I'm not a good salesperson, so I didn't feel I could contribute enough. So, and at that time I was very busy I was still a school principal at that time. Yeah, I was really pleased. First of all, being born in England, a monarchist, to get something of that nature was a great feeling of emotion for me. I think the biggest thing was, though, that I had already moved to the point where I was doing a lot of work in my school division as a trustee, and I'd had to back away from lacrosse. So the fact that people remembered my involvement at that level was really important. I really appreciated it. And it's probably part of the reason why when we got our Hall of Fame going, I jumped in with 2 feet and wanted to help it. So I played on a team that won the Manitoba Junior Championships. So I was very proud of that. I was a good high school middle distance runner. I guess those would be the big, and then I played for a senior Premier Division soccer team. I got picked up by them. So I was playing soccer and lacrosse about the same time, and I had to juggle things. But yeah, those things were good. The other thing was that we were recognized at Phys Ed as one of the first school divisions, St. Boniface School Division, to have a daily Phys Ed program, and we had experienced, educated physical educators in all our Phys Ed classes. So it wasn't just a teacher who was picking it up as an extra load. We actually had professional Phys Ed teachers who taught our classes, and we had some terrific programs going. And that's also a time where I had them all teaching our kids lacrosse. I talked about that earlier. So I would run workshops with them, and then they played against each other, and eventually that led to a 1990 junior field championship for Manitoba, and I bet half the kids were from St. Boniface, and the direct result of the program we'd been running in our high school. So those were big moments. We have a fairly strong alumni gathering every year. So Manitoba Lacrosse alumni send out information, and we meet in a local legion, and you get guys in their 80s all the way down to guys in their 40s, and we're trying to attract a younger crowd now, but 3 of them had shown some interest in keeping track of what had happened in their lives. And so we had Harry, we've interviewed Harry Nightingale, Len Morrill, and Butch Wozniak, who said, why don't we take a look at something beyond the alumni? And so a few people like myself were invited, and from there we set up, we had a lawyer sitting there with us, and so we set up a constitution and got all the proper papers done that we legally had to do, and off we were going. So Harry was our first president. Len and Butch drifted off and back to the alumni, but we were able to keep going, and we've got about 7 solid members now. We keep changing every once in a while, but so we went out into community clubs that were close to Elmwood and looked to see if we could use a wall and something like this. And as it turned out, they all had all their walls sewed up by hockey teams. So as a trustee, I'm listening to all the things that are coming in about technology and the word virtual, this and that. Well, why not a virtual museum? And that kind of took off. We got a grant from the foundation, the Lacrosse Foundation. We got a grant from the Manitoba Historical Society, and we hired a professor from the University of Manitoba, and he did all the history checking way back into the 1800s. And we were amazed to find out all the lacrosse that was played in the small rural towns. And that led us to actually hiring a company to help us get a website and get us started on keeping track of things. It's still baby steps, but we have dreams of getting bigger. We're hoping to hire somebody this year, get a grant for a summer student. We'd look for somebody with technology, sport background, and have them go through all the books, all the pictures and trophies that we've got, and try to build that up until we can digitize it and then make it available to anybody who wants to look. You know, and I guess hopefully we become a model for some of the other provinces that can't afford or don't have the ability to have a museum such as we're sitting in now. And it would be nice if all of them were able to do that. As I look back at the 1890s and that, lacrosse was big in Western Canada, Western Manitoba, and to the south. And the war broke out. That had an impact on the field lacrosse. It became a time when cities were drawing people from the urban areas, or rural areas, I'm sorry. And so cities began to grow, towns got smaller, towns that were almost self-sufficient lost their school, lost stores. So that had an effect on it. And the other, a negative effect, and the other one was that baseball started to become a very popular sport in parts of southern Manitoba. So much so that their Hall of Fame is not in Winnipeg, it is down in one of the rural towns. And so lacrosse kind of lost out on that. So, and when it's been good, there's always been some key person you can find who managed to motivate others. Pat O'Brien, I think Jeep talked about him in St. James, but he got other guys involved from Elmwood who were in our Builders Hall of Fame, and it boomed for a while. And our records show that after a lacrosse game, it was reported the next day in the Winnipeg Tribune and the Winnipeg Free Press. So I've got a little cutout showing the one game I scored 3 goals. And of course my team couldn't believe it. Parker, you score 1 goal every 6, 7 games and you get 3 in one. And So we had something to look through. If you look at archives, it's horrible to go through, to try and find things if they're not digitized. But the sport was covered. And even at Elmwood, a little outside box, we could, if we had somebody available, they would walk through the stands with a hat, and you'd get enough money to pay for the officials, and maybe even make a little money and use it towards your club. And now it's pretty difficult. Even the Blizzard, which is a pretty good junior team, played in the Rocky Mountain League, seldom gets over 200 people out to an arena. And people who come enjoy it. Just getting people to come and see it for the first time.